All right, hello everyone and welcome. It is Tuesday, August 29th, and we are just starting out here in week one of game music composition. So, welcome to the new month. We've got a lot to talk about here in our first session. We're going to talk about the new first week's assignments that we have coming up. So that will be more in the second half of our session this afternoon. And then we will also talk about a lot of kind of introductory and overview stuff about the class, what to expect from the class, and what the kind of layout of the month is. We will talk about what's on FSO and what's coming up, and just talk about some higher level stuff overall in the class. So we have our sessions here on Tuesday and Thursday, and hopefully you are able, like this afternoon, to make it out. If not, everything will be posted up as an archive on FSO the following day. And this Tuesday session is a bit different than the rest of our Tuesdays because we will, by next Tuesday, you will have finished out your first round of assignments, and we will do a bit of peer review. So you will have done your first pass of the composition, and we will take a listen to it, and there is an optional feedback and peer review assignment that is available on FSO where you can submit, and we'll take a listen to your work. So that's starting the next Tuesday and all of the following Tuesdays, where we'll start out with peer review, and then each week we'll talk about the new week's assignments. Our Thursday sessions are meant as an open session for discussion and review of your work so far. If you want to bring anything in to take a listen to ask any questions, we also have an archive with a full class session on industry topics and materials and resources that you can kind of work with throughout the month, and also getting involved in the industry beyond the class. So really the focus of the month overall is to introduce you to this side of the music industry or the entertainment industry, talking about music for games. We'll talk about the fact that your music is just as viable in a video game as it is in any other form of media. And as you've been progressing through your classes, hopefully you've been exploring and discovering this a bit, where earlier on it was all about the learning music theory and production and all the tools and techniques there is to create the music. But in your later classes here, you've applied your music to commercials or jingle work, libraries. You can see that your music works in a film or television show or other sort of media with an image. And it just so happens that this month we'll be talking about games and applying your music to a game project. So, or actually two main game projects. By the end of this month, you will have two fully working Mac game applications that will have your custom music and sound effects. And we'll start talking about your first round of your first composition, your first game. Here in the chat, are we using Wise? No. Well, I do have Wise enabled versions of these projects. So not globally for the class, but if you are interested and you understand Wise, or you want to understand Wise, and certainly having a knowledge of it ahead of time, I can talk about it quite a bit. We can set up some time to go through all that, and if you wanted to investigate that further, then certainly we can support that. But overall, yes, it's mostly a composition class where the games are, if you're familiar with, the games are built in the Unity game engine, and there is a very specific folder in the application that you place your audio files, and assuming that they're named, formatted appropriately, then the next time you run the game, it will play back your music and sound effects. So our focus is understanding how the music actually works in the game. Certainly, we do discuss all of those tools. We will have sessions discussing Wise, discussing Fmod, audio middleware, game engines. I do talk about the technical side a bit kind of later on in the month. And certainly we do approach the whole, there's the creative half of this discussion and the technical side of how it all works. And really one of the focuses of the class is to expose everybody to music for games and to get a sense of the steps involved, what it takes to work with a client, working on a game development project. You are providing music and sound effects, kind of the steps involved, who do you work with, how is the process done. We'll focus largely on the creative side of how do you start with a blank DAW session, start from nothing or just some discussion with a client and actually figure out how to build a music soundtrack that will work for a game. And really one of the big ideas is that the creation of the music is very much, if not identical, to the creation and production of music for any other media. It's still music theory, it's still composition, it's still production and DAWs and synths and samplers and plugins and automation and all of the fun toys and tools in the creation of music. It's just applied to the format of games. So we will talk about what is the same and what is different in the production of music for an album versus film versus a video game. And one of the big ideas there, or actually two big concepts that we will certainly discuss, is the fact that when you is the idea of linear versus nonlinear. Music for a video game is a nonlinear format, meaning that it changes and switches according to whatever the player does while playing the game. Most music you've probably ever written or listened to, and most music in general, is in a linear format, which means there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's structure that we put in our music. There's bars and beats and verses and choruses and transitions and builds and intros and outros and the format and structure of our songs. And that is the same if it's on a music album or if it's a film. When you watch a film, there's a 2-hour long audio file that represents, it's either stereo or 5.1, and it represents all of the music and the sound effects and dialogue that is heard during those 2 hours. But every single time you rewind it back and play it back through, you're going to hear the exact same thing. But in a video game, it is a non-linear format where the music doesn't exist in one large chunk. Games can easily last 2 hours. People can play them, hopefully you shouldn't play them in one sitting for all that very long, but over time, days and weeks and months, people can put 10 or 50 or 100 hours or even more than that. You get into multiplayer online games and it gets hundreds and hundreds of hours. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there is, in a 100-hour long game, there is a 100-hour long audio file that plays from beginning to end that matches exactly what you're going to do in the game, because everybody's going to play the game differently, and the game should change according to the actions going on screen. So there is the nonlinear nature of your music, which is the fact that it doesn't exist in all one chunk, that it doesn't play linear from beginning to end during the gameplay. Music for a video game is made up in lots of little pieces and chunks of music that can change and rearrange according to the action that's going on screen. Some files play one time. Some files play multiple times, or like loop over and over and over again. and they change according to the action. And that's the other concept, which is the interactivity of the gameplay. Like when somebody plays the game, when you put a controller in somebody's hand or a mouse and a keyboard on a computer, kind of all bets are off. You don't really know what they're going to do in that game. And more modern games, more advanced games, or just bigger games, these days they seem to be whole worlds, and it's not just like level 1, level 2, level 3. You're the hero in this story, and you can travel through this immense world that has lots of different needs and changes to your music in the soundtrack. So there's the interactive nature where, dependent on what the player does, the choices that they choose, some people are going to run through the game just blasting through it as fast as possible. They're really, really good and they never lose. And so they fly by large chunks of your game or your music, or maybe the emotion and the story or the narrative. And they're so good, they never lose, that they never hear any of your losing music or the sad music or anything that might be there. Because anytime during an entire game, you might either win or lose. Or there's going to be those folks that just are banging against the walls for hours on end, and they can't figure out the story or solve the puzzle or defeat that enemy, and they're just stuck in that one part going around and around and around. They're getting frustrated by the game already, and then your music is just looping over and over and over again and frustrating them even more. And you have to create music for all sorts of different type of gameplay. And ultimately, you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you know what can happen. You know that they need to start at point A to move to point B and point C, and there's typically a direction that they can move through the game. But there's all sorts of reasons that people go in all sorts of directions in the game, and it changes the parameters. So we're going to talk about how do you create music for a game where you don't ultimately know what's going to happen. You don't have ultimate control of where the music is going to change. You don't know how long it's going to take them to solve that puzzle. You don't know how long it's going to take them to defeat that enemy or find that secret or puzzle or next part of the chapter of the story. So we have to talk about how we're going to create music for an interactive, non-linear story. And so these are the types of things that we'll be talking about through the month. We'll talk about the creative side, the technical side. You'll be creating music for these game projects, which we'll introduce here later on. What else? So our Tuesday sessions, our Thursday sessions, we said were an open session. We talked about peer review coming up next Tuesday. I think those are most of the kind of really introductory stuff that we want to discuss. Myself, I am Chris Latham. I am the course director of the course, and I'll be hanging out with you throughout the month. This is my contact information. Certainly the best way of getting in contact with me would be iChat or email. I'm not always at my desk because when I'm not teaching online, when I'm online, I'm away from my desk during that day, and I also teach on campus, so I'm often in class or lecture. So certainly give me a call, leave a voicemail. If you can't get in contact with me there, actually probably the first place is to send an email or message through FSO. Certainly a clearer way of doing that. Or I'm available on iChat for large periods of the day. So I've been with Full Sail for 15 years now. I started out over in the studios, recording arts side of things before there was a music production program. My history before Full Sail was production in mostly commercial work, radio and television commercials with music and sound effects and dialogue. I have always had a passion in games. always loved audio, loved games, loved music, and so I tried to meld all of those things together. I started out about, I don't know, about 10 or 12 years ago. Always have to do the math. Games really started opening up with all of the tools that were available. It wasn't that you only got a cartridge or something on a disc. Especially with PC games, you could start digging through the game and getting access to the sound effects and the music. And so I took my knowledge of audio and started applying it to games. And so I've worked on a couple of titles over the years. We have EA Sports here in Orlando, kind of close by Full Sail. And we've worked with them over the years with my external production company. And so started out on like small independent games, probably put more audio into them than they deserved at that time, but it gave me a lot of really good material to show off and start show off to EA Sports. Got connected with them, and over the years have worked on different Madden titles and NBA Live and Tiger Woods when that was around, and NCAA when that was around, and I've also turned it into some other external independent projects. One of them, hopefully, we'll be talking about all sorts of different things, but you might be familiar with Steam, the online game store. We'll be talking about digital distribution and iOS, like the App Store and Google Play Store. And Steam is a very popular online gaming store, or store to buy games. And so we've one of the main projects we worked on was a game called Depth, which is a multiplayer underwater sharks versus diver kind of thing. So always audio and sound effects and music and all the tech. So basically, all of that info is whatever you want to discuss and chat about. Please reach out to me. We can talk about all sorts of stuff, like you mentioned Wise earlier. We use Wise in all of our projects, and we can talk about all of that stuff. If you're interested in certainly, obviously, music and composition, that's what we're mainly here for, but gear or hardware or software or technology or certainly games, we can talk about all that stuff all day long. So, yep, let me know. And of course, the class and the assignments, and reach out with any sort of questions or issues you may have as you are progressing through the month. So I do have two quick disclaimers that I often want to throw out there pretty early on in the month. And the first one here is you don't actually have to be any good at playing video games to be successful in this class. I know a lot of folks going through this class, let's say this. There's a wide variety of folks coming through the class and their experience with games. There are those that play games all the time. They are interested in the games industry. They maybe want to work with games or work with media, and they eat. Some folks eat, live, and breathe games, and are up on all the newest technology and all the newest games. And I can certainly nerd out with you all day long and talk about all that stuff, because that's where I am overall. But I also understand that there's a large portion of folks coming through the class that don't play games or haven't been playing games since they were throwing quarters into Pac-Man or playing Minesweeper or whatever. And that is perfectly fine also. And that has no bearing on your success in this class. Your skills to actually play video games and get the highest score or the fastest time or anything like that is of no importance. To the success of your grade or your overall success in the class. And it's not what is expected. What is expected of you is the skills that you have been learning through all of the different classes that you've been working on up to this point. And that is your skills in understanding music theory and composition and music production. A lot of it is being able to understand a client's intention with music and being able to interpret whatever that means and render that into a music soundtrack. So, you don't actually have to be any good at video games to be successful. Now, while you are here in this month, we will completely immerse you in the video games and the video game industry and talk about it, and I hope to encourage interest and further interest. I know a lot of folks come into the class saying I don't know and I don't care, and leave on the other side with like, hey, this is kind of cool. It's not too bad. If something comes across my lap to kind of work in that direction, then maybe I can be involved in that opportunity. But so really, it's just to kind of show you what it is and what's out there, and of course, if you are interested, then to give you all the sorts of resources to do that. And that kind of leads us into a question here in the chat. Do you know of forums for gaming music? One of the videos on FSO had Jonathan Mayer, I believe, and he said he got his first gigs through a forum and a demo that he took to a convention. Absolutely. Jonathan Mayer is, number one, is an awesome person, just in general. And also, he is the senior music manager out at PlayStation, out at Sony, basically, and has worked on pretty much anything and everything that goes across Sony's desk. He is a former Full Sail graduate. He loves, he is open, certainly, at different times in his schedule to discuss and chat with students. He's had some great interface. So as you mentioned, you wrote it down his email. Absolutely. He's a great person to, connect with in all sorts of different ways. Anyway, there is a great video online talking about his start for everything. He is talking about going to the Game Developers Convention, GDC, which is every year out in San Francisco, and they do something called the Demo Derby, and he's talking about a forum called GANG, which is the Game Audio Networking Guild, which is a good resource. It is a paid resource, so I always kind of have to throw that out there. But it is a good resource. There is also a ton of free resources. So, and I do provide those. They are I have a very long list of them in week 4. But ask me that question again maybe afterwards. Well, let's do this. Week 4 is all about how do you get a job? How do you get started in the industry? How do you find clients? All that stuff. So we definitely get into all of that. All right, and so my next disclaimer is programming skills. Very early question that is often brought up either in this class or whenever we do have seminars and presentations with industry folks. One of the early questions is, do I need to be able to program or code in order to be able to work in the games industry? I know music, I can make sounds. Do I have to also be able to program and code? And the answer to that is always no. Your skills that are required are the skills that you bring with your ability to make music. You are hired as the music composer. Your job is to make music. And often often your contract is fulfilled with the delivery of the approved assets. So you send them music, they say no. You send them music, they say no, and you go back and forth, and they go yes and no to different things, and you revise music until you work towards that yes, and everybody agrees this is completely awesome music, this is what we're going to use. And typically, once those assets are approved, then you've fulfilled your contract. And it's somebody else's job to actually technically put it into the game. However, often as you start out working with a team, there's less people on that team, like on a smaller independent team, that there's not tons of money and lots of big budgets and big schedules. But in the smaller teams, you have less people wearing more hats. Smaller teams of very smart, awesome people doing lots of different tasks. And you might be hired not just as the music composer, but just as the all-around audio person. Make music, make sound effects, record dialogue, do everything. And eventually, if you keep just sending your WAV files over to some programmer or some artist or somebody who's not directly involved with audio, it's kind of like giving your music over to somebody else to mix. If they're better at mixing than you, then great. But if they're not, then they could mess things up. And a lot of a lot of game developers don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of music. So a lot of folks start learning all the technology, like tools like Wise and some of the stuff that we will introduce over the month. But it really doesn't get down to the programming code level. It is software. There is code in the background, but we don't really need to think about it that way. There's a lot of other tools that bridge that gap, and we'll talk about all that stuff. So, no, there's typically, in lots of instances, your programmers and your composers are not the same people. All right, the next one here is goals of the class. So what are we here? What are we doing? What does the class expect of you? What do you expect of the class? All that stuff. So our first goal is obviously to write music. That's kind of why you're here in this class, and why you're here in the whole degree, is to have reasons and projects and the practice of writing music for specific, and in our instance, games. So like I said, we have 2 games this month. We'll introduce our first game. Well, we'll introduce both of them, but we'll talk in depth about our first game here in just a few minutes. Mainly your task throughout the month in all of your assignments is to create music and create audio for these game projects. 2 different games. They each require different types of music, different genres of music, and they also use the music in the game differently. So it's 2 different approaches to how you solve the problem of, we don't really know what's about to happen in this game, but we need to have music for it. So we'll talk about how do you start from a blank DAW session, start building your tracks, building your sessions so that it makes sense when you're finally done with it. You'll probably get the idea over the course of the month that it's kind of like puzzle pieces, putting together to create the final whole image or the whole soundtrack. Music exists in little chunks of loops and what we often call one-shots, where they just kind of play through one time, that are sequenced and rearranged according to what's happening in the game. So it's not only creatively fulfilling like the intention of the game, okay, this is a fun game, or this is a serious game, or whatever it is, it's also about how that music plays back. No matter what it sounds like, how does it actually transition and change and react to the action on screen? Another goal of this class is to play video games. I have a very important concept in this class and in this month, which is called game research. And game research is very important because game research means you should be playing video games. And that is very important and very true in whatever aspect of the music industry you are interested in, or the entertainment industry. So if you were interested in the music industry, you wanted to be a songwriter, a producer, you wanted to work in the business side, or whatever aspect of the music industry you wanted to be a part of, you should be listening to tons of music. You should be paying attention to musicians and bands and genres and artists and the record label, the production company, how they recorded it, how they, what sort of vocals process did they use, or how did they record their drums, or what was their songwriting technique, and anything like looking at the credits of your favorite albums and paying attention to who did it and how did they do it. If you're interested in the film industry, you should be paying attention to films. You should be watching tons of films, paying attention to the director and the composer and the producer and the production company, and films and Blu-rays and DVDs and all that stuff are great, and the behind-the-scenes information you can get access to. And all of this is because clients speak in terms of previous projects. Musicians, artists, bands, engineers, producers, everybody speaks in terms of previous albums. Did you hear this kick drum sound that they got? Or did you hear that vocal sound that they got? Or this songwriting technique that they used? I want it to sound like this song on this album by this artist. Or, I mean, just to get a general idea of things. In the film world, it gets a little bit more difficult in film and games because film composers, film directors, film producers, game developers, they don't understand music like musicians do, like artists and engineers do. So you often have to interpret what they mean. So if you have reference, film directors will speak in terms of previous films. If you want to work in the game industry, you just should be playing tons of video games. You should be paying attention to the game, certainly the game music. It's fun enough, obviously, to play a video game. But on top of that, you should also be listening to the music and the sound effects with a critical ear. It's not just about playing it, but it's understanding how the music worked and how it switched and changed, which is kind of hard sometimes because you're having so much fun playing or just focused on playing the game. You totally forgot to pay attention to how the music was playing. So that means that you should be playing video games. If you don't have any video games, then we provide you with video games through the month. There's all sorts of free games on iOS or Android or your the Mac App Store. So if anybody asks you why you are playing more video games this month, you say, I'm doing game research. And actually, we do have certainly a discussion about that overall. So, but it's certainly a part of the industry that you are entering. And of course, beyond all of that music writing and video game playing, we do have a lot to learn because there is a lot of knowledge involved in all of this because of the creative side where it's a whole bank of knowledge to understand the theory and production of music and being able to interpret a game idea and interpret into a music soundtrack. And there's also the technical side, which we will discuss how your music actually makes it into the game. What are the steps? Okay, I know how to make music. I know how to bounce a WAV file. Here's a folder filled with WAV files. Here's all of my music. How do I throw it at the game to do something to make it work? So those are some of the ideas that we will be discussing over the course of the month. Let me take a moment here to jump over to FSO. Oops. Just so we can load that up and talk about what is coming up. If you have not already, go ahead and download all of your assignments for week 1. Has anybody actually downloaded the game and played the game and checked it out? Our first game this month is called 2D Platformer. And we'll be talking about that here. So absolutely, as soon as you have an opportunity, download the new assignments for week 1. Oops, let's get over here. There we go. Okay, so let's do this. We'll talk about week 1, introduction. Okay, so all this introduction stuff you probably have gone through, and it just gives overview and policy information, general information. By this time, you've probably heard quite a bit of all of that. And so here in week 1, we are in lecture 1. You can always download all of the slides in PDF form in each one of the lecture classes. Oops, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong place. Let's do this. Manage? No. Incorrect. how about this? This should look a little bit better. Oops. There we go. All right. So here we are in week one, and week one 2D platformer game composition. This is where you will download all of the information for our first composition, with a lot of info on FSO, but with a video that shows the game itself. Lots of info, and we're going to discuss all of this stuff, but download the zip file which contains the game and PDF assignment and the video of the game. Session preparation. This is a series of videos that will kind of discuss a lot of the same stuff I'm going to discuss here, but also goes in more detail inside of logic and how you might approach things. There's a looping game assignment. Looping music is extremely important in games, because looping music allows you to sit in one place musically before you progress on to the next thing. You can wait until somebody performs an action, again, defeats the enemy or finds the next level or something like that. Then a music loop allows you to stay there and go kind of around and around before you transition on. And there's lots of different techniques to create a loop. We're talking about a piece of music that we can go all the way to the end of a file and then jump back to the top seamlessly without any interruption. So hopefully you've either worked with loops or made a loop at some point, but there's a couple of specific techniques that will work for games. There's an optional feedback and peer review assignment. As I mentioned, every Tuesday we will be doing peer review. Even if you can't make the live class, please submit. We will obviously archive everything. The feedback and peer review allows me to discuss things in just kind of more detail. I can kind of point my way through a session. We'll load it up in Logic and listen to everything. I'll be loading up your kind of final delivered files. It has you post up a kind of mix of everything so other folks can listen to it and provide feedback also. So that is there available, and I always encourage that everybody submits, because it allows a whole bunch of people to see all sorts of different approaches and me kind of talking my way through them. Here we are in Tuesday and Thursday virtual class. Here's where you can download the PDF of each of the sessions on Tuesday and Thursday. And suggested reading and viewing is a series of videos and references to your book and other resources to continue research in the industry. All right, so week two, you will, by the end of week one, you will have created all of your music, created the base soundtrack. We will do peer review in week two, and you have the opportunity to revise and change your music. You will also be creating all of the sound design. So for our first game, there is 18 sound effects that you will be making for this game. A lot of them can be done with your voice. They are either call-outs or what are sometimes also known as exertions, which are like when you jump or when you get punched or those sorts of kind of grunts. And so you'll see what I'm talking about when we talk about show off the game. And then there is a composition description assignment, which will be where you kind of deliver everything. By the end of week two, you will have composed the music. You will have hopefully gone through peer review and we discuss your submission. You then have the opportunity to revise your composition. You will create the sound effects. You will put them into the game and start testing them. do certainly leave time for that, because very often you get to the point where you put your music and sound effects into the actual game and start playing, and things may not work exactly like you expected with your music. Where, I mean, yes, it's still your music, but how they transition or the mix between music and sound effects, those can. So you test everything out, and you will also create a video capture of everything. Then this composition description is kind of like a post-mortem, gives you the ability to kind of list out how you did your composition, what techniques you used, and all sorts of different things. So this is, I guess I point this out because it says test, but it's not like a test that you study for, or that the information's somewhere else. It is your information, your composition. It's asking you about your approach to the project. Then in week 3 and 4, we basically, it's the same a similar flow for everything, but we introduce a new game, new approach to the music, needs new music and sound effects. So that's what we have coming up throughout the month. As I mentioned, you have a textbook that should be in your possession now, called A Composer's Guide to Game Music. It's by Winifred Phillips. It is a wonderful resource and text for specifically game music. I've searched through a lot of different game audio texts, and there's like one chapter for music as opposed to this text, which goes not only into the creative side, but some of the tools and technology, and also some of the business side of things, like how do you actually keep your lights on and your family fed with maintaining client relationships, and how does that all work together. So there's some great resources. There's nothing specifically in the book that it will be graded on in the class, or it's supplementary material. It doesn't follow, like, certainly directly, but there's a lot of ideas and concepts that are pulled from different parts of the book. All right, let's talk about your first project for the month. We'll talk about the games that we have in store here. So we'll get into our first game, called 2D Platformer. And let me just take a moment to bring up the video. When you download the assignment, you get a copy of the game, which the icon looks like this. And it'll load up a kind of window here, and you probably could just hit play and not ignore all these settings. But obviously you can change the size of the window, make it bigger or smaller. The graphics quality probably isn't going to do anything. The graphics aren't all that, I mean, it's mostly cartoony graphics, so it's not doing all that much in the graphics department. And if you have this checked, it'll display in a window, like, I don't know, like a window like this. If you have this unchecked, it'll be full screen. And along with the game, you get a video. And I'm not actually going to play the game. I'm just going to play the video, which shows the game, and I can talk through that. All right. So this is 2D Platformer. You won't hear any audio right now. I have it turned down. And 2D Platformer is named that because it is a 2D game. You only go left and right. You can jump up and down, and you basically move along a 2D plane. And it's called 2D Platformer because it is a platform game. You are basically running and jumping between different platforms. And a platformer game is very common in the industry. It's been around since Super Mario Brothers and Metroid and Donkey Kong, and all of these classic games, and is still very, very popular today. A platformer game is basically you're running and jumping between different platforms. I don't know, jumping on the character's head or shooting them or punching them or something like that to defeat the enemy. And so you can see here that 2D platformer is kind of a lighthearted game. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and your music probably shouldn't either. The concept is you are a being that is defending from the alien invasion. You are defending London. You can tell because this alien ship has come down, the London Bridge, it has fallen down. Over here you've got the London Eye, the Ferris wheel, you've got Big Ben, it's all broken. So the aliens have come to attack, and for some reason you are the only hope for humanity. You are a being with a top hat and a monocle and a mustache and a bazooka, of course. And you are going to take out all of these enemies, and well, that's all we know right now. This certainly isn't a full and complete game. This might be one level of a much larger game. There's no end to the game. The score just keeps going higher and higher and higher. But it's very indicative of the type of work that you would get along the process, where they'd say, they certainly never make a game in order. They don't make it level 1, level 2, level 3, or rarely is that done. So out of nowhere, they'll say, okay, this is level 7. And by now, the aliens have attacked, and you are defending all of being humanity. So obviously the game is kind of lighthearted, wacky or silly. You could picture this being maybe a mobile game. You might play this on a smartphone or a tablet, or also what is known as a casual game, where it's not going to take hours and hours and hours to play and win, and you can just play the game for a few minutes and have a fun, quick game. So let's talk about the music and what is entailed, what is expected with the music. The main concept that we are focused on in this game is the idea of intros, loops, and endings. The music is going to have, it's going to start when the game starts. It is then going to switch between multiple looping files over during gameplay. And then when you've run out of all your health points, the game will be over. And then the game will start over again. So that is the general format, and I will explain that in a whole lot more detail here in a little bit. Let's talk about like style, music style, music theme, music genre, those types of things. We actually leave the genre of the music up to you, because this is your first game, and I'm really more focused on kind of you understanding the process and everything that's involved. The music that you end up writing is certainly up to you. It can be in all sorts of different styles. It can be more acoustic instrumentation. It can be more kind of electronic and synth. It could be rock or hip hop or electronic or pop or just all sorts of different styles. There's other kind of influences. The documentation talks about, well, it's set in London, so there could be some sort of British influence in there, whatever that means. Or there's also an alien invasion. I mean, granted, they're kind of cute little red and green aliens, but you could also go for kind of a campy sci-fi vibe. So somewhere in the documentation, I say Monty Python meets Mars Attacks, or Benny Hill versus the Body Snatchers. Just kind of, again, lighthearted. The music would be kind of all ages, family friendly, nothing too serious or dark or depressing or anything like that. Keep it lighthearted, upbeat, kind of a faster pace overall to really present the energy that's necessary for the game. All right, so let me actually open up the PDF. This is the, so you'll get this video, you'll get the actual game. One big suggestion is don't post music or sound effects directly to this video. You can import the video into Logic and reference it, or this video is there so that you can just quickly watch something or check something out in the game without launching the game and playing it. But don't use this video as the specific timing for everything, because everybody's going to play the game differently. I mean, I've had folks in the past import this and like actually post sound effects and music to it, but the game is going to take care of all of that. You make all of the sounds in the correct format for everything, and the game will put it all together into something that plays back. So here is the PDF that you get along with this assignment. And let's see, project overview is a lot of information that I am discussing currently, so it kind of restates a lot of the same stuff that I'm talking about here. Game overview, we say 2D platformer games have a long pedigree in the industry. Classics like Super Mario Bros., Donkey Kong, and Metroid, or modern varieties Limbo, Braid, and Jetpack Joyride. Platformers are still extremely popular in the games industry. How to play, moving left and right. You can use the arrow keys. Spacebar to jump. Left click on your trackpad will fire the bazookas. If you pick up, there's parachutes that come in for pickups, and you can pick up a bomb, and you can then right click to drop the bomb. So it hopefully shouldn't be too difficult to play through and get a sense for what the game is. I mean, you don't really need to play much more than to get an overall feel of the game. Excuse me. Instrumentation. Again, I leave the style and the genre up to you, but you definitely need drums, bass, harmony, melody. You need a strong rhythm to keep up that pace. You need a bass line and probably a few layers of harmonic instrumentation to support the melody. And then you need a strong melody to create a lot of the variation and development. Over the course of the game, we are mainly listening to 3 8-bar loops. And so there needs to be a lot of change and variation within those 8-bar cues so that they're still entertaining and they can play for a long time without getting repetitive. You want to watch out for repetition in your music. It's going to be repetitive enough on its own how it plays back. You don't want to create any more repetition because sometimes what I'll hear is in an 8-bar cue, in 8 bars, it'll be basically the same 4 bars back to back. Or within 8 bars, it's 2-bar looped 4 times. Or even worse, it's 1 bar that's just played over and over again 8 times. So watch out for that. You shouldn't, since you need drums, bass, harmony, and melody, you shouldn't just have 4 tracks. You should have certainly more than that to have enough instrumentation to support the game. A strong melodic lead would be a single instrument. Drums would be a single instrument. Your bass line would probably be a single instrument, but 2 or 3 or 4 different harmonic layers supporting that melody will certainly work. All right, this is the asset list, probably one of the most important elements of the PDF document here. And that shows you that there are a total of 9 files. The sort of final thing that you will be turning in for this assignment is 9 WAV files and a screenshot of your DAW session. It doesn't matter which DAW you use to build all of your music. A lot of the assignments are certainly in kind of the terms of Logic and like the explanations and things like that, but you can use whatever DAW you want to get the job done. So we have a total of 9 files. and they are separated into 3 groups of 3. Hold on just a sec. Let me take a quick pause here. So, 9 files, 3 groups of 3. We have 3 intro files. We have 3 main loop files, and we have 3 ending files. They are to be named exactly according to the asset list with music underscore intro underscore 01.wave. Notice that the intros and the endings are each 2 bars long, and the main loops are each 8 bars long. And then everything is 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. The intros and endings do not loop, but the main loops need to be able to loop. And by looping, again, I mean reaches the end and it musically makes sense to return back to the top. So let's load up the video again and talk about how the game progresses and how these 9 files are actually going to work. Before that, actually, let me start out with, notice when I rewind out the video all the way back, it says powered by Unity. When you first load up this game, you will see that Unity logo. The Unity game engine is a very popular tool to build games. Just in the same way that you might say, I used Logic or Pro Tools to make my music, people say I use the Unity game engine to make my games. We'll talk about the Unity game engine. We will talk about the Unreal game engine and how these are tools that we use to actually combine our music with the game. So all of our, if you are familiar, if you play iOS games or enough games in general, you might have seen this Unity logo somewhere. One of the great things about all of the software that I talk about throughout the month is all free, or at least all the game software, but is all free, freely available for you to download and check out. So all of our games this month are made in Unity. All right, so the game starts. We're going to talk about how the game works with these 9 files. Let's say you have composed and bounced out these 9 files. You formatted them, you've named them correctly, you've formatted them in the correct sample rate and bit depth, and there's a very specific location described in the documentation as to where you place your game, your music to check it out. So there's this section down here, putting your music in the game. There's a very specific folder that you place all of your music in, and the next time it will play. So the game starts, and the computer says, okay, the game has started, what do I do? And the game looks at the code, and it says, all right, in this folder, there should be 3 files named intro 0, 1, 2, and 3. There are these 3 files in that specific location. It doesn't know that they're 2 bars long. It doesn't know anything about your music. It doesn't know about the content of the file. There's no concept of your music. It just knows that it's 16-bit 44.1, and it knows when the file starts and stops. So the only reason this whole thing is going to work is because you, as the composer, compose the music that way. The length of 2 bars depends on how the tempo of your music, how fast or slow your music is. So the game doesn't care though. So the game starts up and it says, okay, what do I do? There are 3 intro files. Randomly choose one of them to play and then play it. So the computer goes into that folder, it sees those 3 intro files, and it randomly chooses intro 3 and plays it. So the game is playing for 2 bars of your music. Then, again, the game has no clue about your music. It just knows when that file stops. and it reaches the end of the ones and zeros that is your music, and it says, okay, I've reached the end of this intro 3 file. What do I do now? And the game looks at the code and it says, all right, in that same folder there should be 3 main loop files. They're named main loop 1, 2, and 3. Randomly choose one of them and play it. All right. And immediately and invisibly, the game switches over from intro 3 and it chooses main loop 2. And it plays. It's very important to understand that main loop 1 isn't necessarily or often or ever, well, it will eventually, but intro 1 does not necessarily go to main loop 1, which does not necessarily go to ending 1. They are completely randomly chosen. So it'll go intro 3 to main loop 2 to ending 2, and then go back through it in any sort of random order, which is good because it provides the most variation to us. So it chooses main loop 2. It plays it for 8 bars. Depending on how long your music is, how fast your music is, determines how long that file is. Finishes those 8 bars and says, okay, I'm done. Reach the last 0. What do I do? The game looks at the code and it says, well, it says here now, if you're still playing, then after main loop 1, after you choose one main loop, then choose another one. Okay, fine. And it does this for the entire gameplay. After it plays the intro, randomly chooses one of the intros. After it's done playing that, then it just constantly chooses a main loop. It'll choose main loop 1, then it'll choose main loop 3, then it'll go back to 1, then it'll choose 2, then it'll choose 3 5 times in a row for whatever reason. And then it'll go back to 2 and 1. And so the bulk of your composition is made up of these 3 8-bar loops that are constantly moving around. So that means that your music needs to be consistent across all of the files. Your instrumentation needs to be very similar. You needs to have identical instrumentation. It needs to be the same band playing the same music across all of the files. It needs to all be in the same key. It needs to be all in the same tempo. It is not 9 individual files. It is one composition divided up into 9 pieces. So you will have, they're not even different compositions. It's just intro 1, 2, and 3 have to be able to go to any main loop 1, 2, and 3, which has to go to any ending 1, 2, and 3. So they all have to be in the same key, the same tempo, the same time signature, or else it's going to sound like a horrible DJ going back and forth between 2 totally different records and different tempos and different keys. So that is most of the soundtrack. And as the game is being played, it's constantly rotating through these main loops. So then the question is how do we ever get to an ending? When is the game over? And the game is over when you run out of all of your health points. I don't know if you noticed, but up here at the top there is a health bar. And that eventually goes down all the way. I'm just going to fast forward to there. Somewhere in here. All right, there he goes. All right, so I'm at 0 health. I just have a sliver left. And so when I take that last bit of damage, the character falls down in the toxic sludge below, and the game eventually restarts. So we have an ending cue. As soon as you run out of the last bit of your health, it's going to immediately cut off the main loop and transition into one of the 3 ending cues. So intro plays at the very beginning, main loop 1, 2, and 3 constantly switch around, and then as soon as you lose all your health points, it cuts off the main loop and immediately transitions into an ending. So let's take some time here and actually listen to something. I've been talking about it way too long. Let's just take an opportunity to listen to some examples. That'll take me a while or a moment to get it all set up. What am I looking for? There we go. No. There we go. I'm going to let Logic load it up here. Hold on. All right. So, this is kind of what I'm talking about. All right, let me actually take a moment just to make sure we can all hear this. Get my headphones on here. Let me double check Logic. All right, so let's see. Let's go over here. All right, that looks like it's broadcasting. Were you able to hear that on the other end? Looks like we are good to go. Okay, this is what we are doing and what we are referring to. All right, so what you see here is, this is kind of the final delivery of everything, but each student, these are 7 different student examples. So each track has 9 files, which would represent one single submission. Over here, these are all of the main loops. You can notice they're a bit longer overall. These are the A-bar loops. These are all of the intros right here in this column. And these are all of the endings over here. And we only do that because that's how they import alphabetically. So we're going to start with the main loops because that gives us the most indication of that's what we're going to hear most often. So main loops. Main loops, number 1, they need to loop, meaning that there is no gaps, no pauses in the music. It needs to transition seamlessly from one to the next. Because like I said, it can go from main loop 1 to main loop 2 to main loop 3, or it could play main loop 2 4 times in a row. It's all random. So every single one of them has to be able to transition, and it does it in any order also. So it has to be able to transition to any one of these. And this is really where the challenge of this composition is. When you reach the end of one of these main loops, there's basically a 3-prong fork in the road where it could either jump back to the top and play again. It could jump to 1, could jump to 2, or 1 could jump to 3. It could jump back to 1, it could jump to 2, it could jump to 3. And so you have to make these similar enough to each other that they can transition. But they still need to have enough variation that it's not the same thing playing over and over again. So it is all about, it's the same band playing the same song, but there's variation from one cue to the next. So let's go ahead and take a listen to these 3. So this is more acoustic instrumentation. You have the marimba, a little bit of tuba and drums. Then you have then you have the change in the melodic line, the harmonic line, the bass line, the drums. Slight variations in each. It still comes from the same place, but still different from one to the next. Then we have our third variation here. at least, I mean, mostly the drums and the harmony stay in a very similar place, but that melody constantly is moving. Here are 3 intros. So these are going to play directly before the main loops. So this is main loop, no, this is intro 3 going into main loop 1. Intros, they need to build, they need to rise in energy and intensity before they drop into the main loop. You would be well served to start the main loop on the tonic of your chord progression or of your key, and so you have this anchor where you're always starting from. You don't know where you're going to end up. Well, you will, you should, but it doesn't matter where you end up because you're always going to return back to that tonic. And maybe the intros kind of rise and hang on the 4 or 5 chord before they drop into that main loop. So did I do that? I don't think I actually played that. Oops. So it should transition as seamlessly as possible, and you will check intro 1, 2, and 3 against main loop 1, 2, and 3. These are 3 endings over here. First off, they sound like this. So, number 1, endings need to end. They need to reach silence. These are actually a bad example of that. These down here are better overall. See how they actually reach silence in their waveform. You want to watch out, or else they're going to get cut off by the end of the file. So, endings need to end. They need to resolve the music from the main loop. They will start out at the same intensity and amount of instrumentation as the main loop, and then take 2 bars to resolve to a finish. So let's jump down to another one. We'll play 2 more examples here. Here's another one. So this one's got a lot of great movement through it, and kind of based off of live instrumentation. Here is, or I should say acoustic instrumentation. It's probably all MIDI, but here's 3 intros. So they all kind of rise and head up there before to hang there right before they will drop into the downbeat and probably the tonic for the main loops. Here are 3 endings. I have one more that's more of a synth kind of idea. This is more along the lines of kind of classic Nintendo or Sega Genesis games. So here's another one, completely synth but still heavily melodic and a great kind of drive to the music. So there's three strong melodies. Here are three intros heading into that. Both the intros, you're typically well served to try subdividing the beat, and you'll hear that here. It goes 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that's how it goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's what I'm trying to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's basically subdividing each time. And then endings. So, real strong endings. They go back to the tonic, they hit a final note, and they fade out to silence. Notice that they do actually reach silence. These up here would be a bad example because they don't actually reach silence. But anything that has that little bit of tail will work out well. All right, so hopefully that gives you some good information in getting started with your 2D platformer composition. Let's go back here. Kind of quickly, your second game is called Angry Bots, and you will be working on this in the second half of the month in week 3 and 4. And this one is a much more kind of epic, dark, probably not all ages, family-friendly kind of game. It's got much more, it's got robots and explosions and weapons and all sorts of fun, cool stuff in it. So it has a much more modern production style, kind of either like metal or epic orchestral or electronic or just anything that's heavy and intense and I don't know. So we'll certainly talk about the next game coming down the line, but it is a new style of game, a new approach to the music, all of those fun different things. And again, I mentioned the looping assignment. There is a PDF workflow and techniques for setting up this assignment. So yeah, reach out and let me know if you have any questions on the assignments or the games or anything else. We'll be back again at the same time on Thursday, and we can chat about anything you need to. You guys are great stuff in the chat and all that stuff. So and everybody out there in archive land, please submit your projects by the end of the week for peer review. It's a great opportunity for everybody involved and all that stuff. So if you have any questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes after class. If not, then we'll do it again on Thursday. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.